Welcome back to the Pacific Coast Model Works YouTube channel. When I started planning my layout, I knew it was going to be located in California, my home state. The big debate in my mind was whether I should model the Sierra Nevada mountains or the coast. Ultimately, the coast won out because I really wanted to model the ocean, and I wanted it to be super realistic. The very first thing you see as you enter the layout room is the Pacific Coast at Albion, which is currently a sea of masonite at the tip of the Albion Peninsula. This is where the wharf will be located for interchange with marine shipping, and lately I've been itching to model that coastline. The problem is I've never modeled the ocean before. Having grown up beside the ocean in California, I have a pretty good feel for what it should look like, and I've been binging YouTube videos from modelers who are expert at it. To get my feet wet, pun intended, I am creating a small diorama to use as a test bed for techniques. I'll show you how I created the diorama in this episode. If you haven't yet subscribed, hit the subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you can see my videos as they come out. Also, please like and share the video so others can see it as well. It's time to hit the surf. The Northern California coastline is very rocky, so the first thing I need to do is create some surf-worn rocks. Although I originally planned to use plaster castings in this section of the layout, I was introduced to a technique for creating rocks out of insulation foam in a video by Dave Meek, which is linked in the description. I start with a hunk of foam and just start breaking off the corners until it's about the size and shape that I am looking for. If you have a very specific size in mind, be aware that the rock will get smaller as we shape it and make it a bit bigger than needed. The next step is for me to use my X-Acto knife to score strata into the rock. I just cut parallel lines into the surface. For deeper cracks, I cut a V-shaped groove and dig the foam out. Every once in a while, I'll score a crack across the grain for interest. Once I have the surface scored, I use a steel wire brush to abrade the entire surface of the rock. This is an extremely messy process. If I feel I need some more deep cracks, I'll once again use the knife to dig them out. I use my mini heat gun close to the surface to melt the foam a bit. This will get rid of any fuzz that was raised by the wire brush. Keep the heat gun moving or you will melt holes in the foam. Just keep working it until you feel that you have a natural looking surface. Now I simply brush my hand over the surface to remove any loose material. Now it's time to paint. As always, I consult photos and videos and even Google Maps to determine the color of the rocks. Along the Northern California coast, the rocks are predominantly a light tan color at the top, fading to a reddish-brown color further down, and a deep brown to almost black where they meet the surf. Using acrylic craft paints and a brush, I apply these colors one at a time, working them wet and blending them as I go. I use the heat gun, held at a distance, to dry the base layer paint. Now I use a lighter tan color and dry brush the entire surface. Once that is dry, I mix brown and black thin to a wash and apply it over the entire surface, dabbing the high spots off with a paper towel. Once the paint is dry, I apply similar colors of pan pastel over the rock, starting with the light color and working to black at the base of the rock. I use hot melt glue to adhere the rocks to the diorama base. I've decided to use Sculptamold as the base material for the diorama. I mix the media with water in a 1-gallon plastic Ziploc bag to the consistency of cottage cheese. I let it steep in the bag for about 5 minutes, then give it a final mixing and cut a corner out of the bag. I pipe it onto the diorama base and spread it with my fingers to the rough shape that I want. I just keep working and pushing it around to refine the shape. When the material starts to flash over, I wet my fingers with water and use them to smooth the material and do the final shaping. Allow the Sculptamold to dry for at least 8 hours. Now I'm going to use a second technique to apply more texture to the water. I mix matte Mod Podge approximately 50-50 with water and brush it onto the Sculptamold water surface. I push toilet paper into the glue layer and then soak it well with the glue mixture. I do this 3 times. While the paper is still wet, I use a stiff brush to push the wet paper around, creating smaller waves. Use a photograph of real surf to create a realistic texture. Once the toilet tissue is dry, I paint the diorama with an airbrush. Using a deep blue color mixed with black, I airbrush the deeper part of the water. I then added some yellow to the paint to create a fluorescent green color, which I faded in as the water becomes shallower. I then took some white paint, added green and blue to create a mint color that I sprayed over the fluorescent green. I added some dark spots in the water that will indicate submerged rocks. I blend this into the modeled rocks. Not a lot of detail here, just an indication of rocks below the water. Finally, I paint the shore and out into the water with a tan color that represents sand. Depth will be indicated by colors here, not actual depth as would be the case with a resin pour. One feature of the California coast that I thought would be interesting to model is kelp, a plant-like algae that anchors itself to the ocean floor and spreads across the water's surface. I was going to simulate this with laser-cut cardstock, but after several failures, I simply attempted to paint them in. I'm not especially happy with how this turned out, and will try to develop a better method. Perhaps a laser-cut leather stamp would work. I did airbrush shadows under the kelp, which worked out nicely. Again, this will need some more experimentation. I used some zip texture to simulate sand, introducing a bit darker pigment as the sand nears the water. I did not mention it in my texturing video, but as you mix the pigments into the plaster to make zip texture, you really need to use a blender. If you don't blend it, it ends up with clumps of plaster and pigment that activate poorly when you wet the zip texture. This happened on my beach sand, and I am not very happy with it either. With this dry, I began applying gloss Mod Podge to the water's surface with a wide brush. I brush Mod Podge along the edge where the water meets the beach. Next time I do this, I will make a clean line between the light green water and the beach and bring the final wave edge up onto the area that is just sand. I apply one coat of gloss Mod Podge over the ocean surface. Then I take a step that many nautical modelers do, but is overlooked by many model railroaders. Using a fine brush, I add foam patterns to the surface of the water. Again, reference photos and videos are essential to this step if it is going to look realistic. Mine doesn't look great, but like most things, more experience will lead to better results. I'm using gesso thinned with water to create the foam surface detail. I start with a strong white color near the crest of the wave and drag the foam patterns back away from the wave, allowing them to fade naturally. The size of these patterns varies depending on their distance from the waves and other obstacles that introduce air into the water's surface. Now, allowing each coat to dry, I apply multiple coats of gloss Mod Podge over the ocean surface until I obtain the correct texture. Apply light coats, and per the manufacturer's directions, you can apply a coat every 20 to 30 minutes. Heavy coats take much longer to dry. Now I mix some woodland scenic snow into some gloss Mod Podge to create wave crests. This is applied with a toothpick and a cotton swab. Use it judiciously according to your reference photos. I'm pretty happy with the way this diorama turned out. I think these techniques will work fine on a larger scale, though they are somewhat time-consuming. Well, I hope you enjoyed this week's video, and I hope that you learned a few techniques that you can use in your own modeling, as always. A lot of the techniques that I used in creating this diorama, I learned from a YouTube channel called Studio Blue Ocean. And this week, I want to encourage you to take a look at some YouTube channels of modelers that are doing modeling other than model railroading. Effectively, a layout is just a huge diorama, and I think a lot of times as model railroaders, we get consumed by quantity over quality of modeling. If you look at YouTube channels of modelers that do armor or ship models or aircraft models, their dioramas are much smaller and they're always consumed with quality over quantity. And though my layout is a large diorama, I want it to be the best quality that I can build. So this week, do yourself a favor, check out a few channels of modelers that are doing aircraft or armor, military models, ship models. You're going to learn some great techniques from those guys, and you will see that you can do quality modeling no matter what you're doing, no matter what quantity you're doing, you can still do quality. Hey, I appreciate you joining me again for this episode. And until I see you next time, this is Scott Forbes saying, happy modeling.